know everybody at this point in time has probably seen countless amounts of, let's say, power fantasy stories or fantasy stories to reincarnated, isekai, different stories like that. And good examples of this is something, let's say, like Soul Leveling, Omniscient Reader, something like Hardcore Leveling Warrior. We've seen these different types of stories over the years that have gained a lot of popularity, a lot of, people have latched onto it and have formed quite a huge community. And because of, obviously, the popularity of these series, there's a lot of individuals that like to, replicate these certain themes, these traditional fantasy themes and cliches and tropes, and make their own story about it. And if there is one thing that this series I want to be talking about today, called I Was the Final Boss, is that we are following the final boss. And there is a few series out there that's kind of similar to this, but I do really like the twist on the elements within this story, and that's why I want to sit down and actually talk about it. Because if you're someone that obviously likes, let's say, an evil main character, or someone that just legitimately likes characters that are not necessarily just goody-goody two-shoes, you're probably going to enjoy this story. Because the MC of this series, as the title suggests, was the final boss, aka basically the main villain, the antagonist, the person that was meant to, be brought down to save humanity. That is basically the overall summary of the main character. And so, in these traditional stories, have talked about in the past, like you have these different towers, dungeons, etc. And, at the end of it, they have to defeat this boss to be able to save the world. It's a typical storyline, so to speak. Nothing wrong with that as well, but it's a traditional storyline. Well, basically, our main character is the final boss that sits in his dungeon, his room, his final, floor, so to speak, and he's just trapped there. And we get to see a very unique twist to the storytelling, because most of the time, obviously, we follow an underdog character that somehow gets very powerful, very strong, and it's, a power fantasy. It turns into one. I mean, Soul Leveling is a very good example of this, and it's a good series, but obviously it is a power fantasy. And that's the normal route stories take. But this series decides to just start us off with following the main final boss, the main villain, seeing his perspective of sitting in his dungeon, sitting in his throne, and just chilling. Just straight up just chilling. And every time someone challenges him, we get to see that he just quickly disposes of them, and he moves on. He throws their treasures and items to the side, and that's about it. And he literally shows that he has no compassion or care for humanity, that he even calls them toys. And you got to imagine, from this perspective, it's fascinating because we're always seeing it from the human side. We're always seeing, the human's perspective of how they have to challenge this monstrous being, this demon, this devil, whatever, dragon maybe, and basically as they bring them down with every effort in their fiber of their being, it's a hard-fought victory. But we get to see it from the villain as, someone comes in, these challengers and all that, seem to be strong, but they just get demolished instantly, and he grows rather bored, very, very bored, and impatient. And as he continues to sit in his room alone for how many years, so to speak, he starts to wonder, can he leave? He wants to see more of what is outside of those walls, what's outside the door within his final boss room. He wants to know what is going on. And I find this interesting, because when you really do think about, let's say, games, etc., there's bosses that will sit in their boss arena, and that's their whole existence within a game. And I know for a fact, obviously, many of us that play games, we don't think too much about that, but it's like, imagine if an entity, like an NPC or whatever, gained awareness that they were trapped in this room and they legitimately couldn't leave. That sounds like a very sad existence. And I like the direction the story takes that. It shows the character becoming kind of aware of the world around them and wanting to be free from the shackles of the boss room. And one day, a chance does happen. This very strong adventurer hunter appears to bring the main boss down, our main character, and he has a weird prompt appear on his screen saying if he brings down the hunter raven, he will get his deepest desire fulfilled. And his deepest desire is obviously to venture out into the human world. And so, after a hard-fought battle, which the hero obviously seems to have won, the villain has one last-ditch effort to attack, and he kills the hero that stands before him upon him dying as well. As he awakens, he is a human. And thus begins the story of I was the final boss. And I really, like I said, I like the twist on the storytelling and what it's trying to, convey. Because once again, we're always following a goody-goody two-shoes, or a guy that's very selfish or whatever. And obviously the MC does, embody some of these elements. Basically he's going to be selfish, he's going to be evil. But, he is the boss. And the thing is that it makes sense for him to be extremely overpowered, because it's like, look, good example, Sephiroth, okay? Let's just say in a weird timeline, an alternate reality, Sephiroth wasn't, like, say, the final boss of, like, Final Fantasy, okay? And somehow he started off from the very beginning, and then even though he was the final boss, we get to follow his story, and he gets to change history or whatever. It would make a lot of sense why he would just be overwhelmingly powerful as, he continues down his story, because of technically what he was capable of at the end result of the story. I mean, he was leagues above everyone. So I do really enjoy the storytelling and how it uses the typical tropes and cliches in a really smart way. And that is why I kind of wanted to talk about the story, because I was like, whoa, this is kind of fun. It's really fun. Now, I'm going to be just straight up and honest. I don't think that this is the best story I've ever seen. I want to keep it real. But I do think that it's very fun. And if you're someone that wants a power fantasy, and something that kind of mixes it up and you don't follow, let's say, a good character, you're probably going to enjoy this. And I 100% would recommend you checking it out and giving it a read, because it's enjoyable. It's very quick to catch up. There's not many chapters, so to speak. So it's very, very easy to catch up to the story and then see how you actually feel about it. And let's be honest, when it comes to, let's say, webtoon chapters, they're not necessarily too long. So even if, let's say, there was like 100 plus chapters, it's really not that much of a read when you really take a moment to consider it. But backing up for a second, I want to talk about the main character's name, which is Bahamut. Now, this is a little bit of trivia that obviously I think not a lot of you probably would care about, but if you are someone that has watched me for a very long time, I think you might be aware that I do love a bit of mythology. I do like ancient history, mythology, deities, etc. They're very fascinating to learn about and kind of what people believe in, etc. And basically, Bahamut is a legitimate deity within our history that was, like, created by the Knights Templar. And the deity, which is Bahamut, was a half-human, half-demon, which had goat-like appearances. And obviously, the character, the final boss, represents that to a T. And I do think that it's interesting that, obviously, it shows in the chapters that he definitely is basically half-demon, half-human, and we get to see these elements displayed within the story. But the very fascinating part about the character is that he's supposed to bring balance. Like, that is the literal lore to the deity, Bahamut. That he is literally balance itself. That's at least what he is supposed to symbolize. And so, with the character obviously no longer being a villain, or let's say a final boss, I guess he kind of would be a villain, but no longer being a final boss, it makes you wonder what kind of balance is he going to bring to the world now that he's technically free, able to wander around the world and do whatever he wants. Because he's supposed to represent that. So there's not going to be just nothing but evil, but also there's not going to be just good as well. There's going to be a literal balance of both sides. So we'll have to see where the story wants to actually take it. But overall, if you're interested in the story, like if you want to check it out and read it for yourself, I'll have a link in the description. Click on it and you can read it. It's completely free and legal as well. So basically, if you are interested in actually checking it out, click it down below. But anyways, before I wrap this video up, I do also want to say that the artwork as well. Like, if I had to talk about the artwork, I don't know if it's by a similar art team or whatever, but the art reminds me a lot of Solo Leveling, which is why I kind of mentioned Solo Leveling a few times throughout, this review. But the artwork reminds me of Solo Leveling, which is a good thing. I think Solo Leveling has very beautiful artwork, and the artwork of the series definitely is very reminiscent of that. So if you are a sucker for good artwork as well, you probably will enjoy this series too. But I guess I'll wrap this up here. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video and you would like more videos of recommendations or any type of videos like ReZero, etc., then, do leave me a like down below. It does help me out a lot, and I would greatly appreciate it. And if you want to get notified for whenever I upload a video, hit that bell icon as well. But please be safe, stay healthy, Chibi out.